Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Ted Turner. Success leaves clues, kids. I just named 5 of the greatest names in business in the last 150 years. And they all have one thing in common. They're ball busters. They're hard as nails. Where does that leave you? I still work 50, 60 hours a week. And I haven't had to work in 35 years. You're not willing to do anything. You're not willing to sacrifice anything to be a high-performance person.
I don't want to be like that.
No, most people don't.
I want to be liked.
Yeah, well, see, you want to fit in. I'm the only speaker that you're ever going to hear that really, with all his heart, doesn't give a shit. If I leave here you liking me, I did something wrong.
Getting your business funded is a lengthy process with the banks, and it can take weeks before getting an answer. ProfitFX works with the best in the finance industry to bring you an unrivaled business funding solution for South African businesses. Our funding partners have funded millions in the last year in support of growing your business and our economy. Get in touch with your talk show host to request more information. A trade history of 3 years or more and an annual turnover of 1 million rand or more is required. Terms and conditions apply.
Be the kind of trader who sees the big picture. The world is changing around you. Global threats push gold, the safe haven asset, to higher prices each and every day. Now's your chance to start trading gold. Just go to capex.com and register to get up to a $5,000 bonus on your first deposit. Simply use GOLD5000 as a promo code and you're good to go. Capex.com proudly welcomes you to the next level trading experience. Register now and start taking full advantage of the new gold rush. Terms and conditions apply. Exposure to gold obtained via contracts for difference, which are leveraged products and incur a high level of risk. Capex.com is operated by JME Financial Services, Pty Ltd, an authorized financial services provider.
So today is the day when things fall into place, when all my hard work pays off and paves the way. So many times I've fallen down in the past, leaving scars and memories that formed a rash, or one that I scratch when I'm down but not anymore. The rash is healed and I'm ready to walk through the doors. I've always known this day would come, now I'm ready to take it. Not mistaken, this is why I breathe to say I made it. What does that mean? It means I'm finally famous, but not in the context that the world gave us. This is deeper than that, an everlasting love.
Be the kind of trader who sees the big picture. The world is changing around you. Global threats push gold, the safe haven asset, to higher prices each and every day. Now's your chance to start trading gold. Just go to capex.com and register to get up to a $5,000 bonus on your first deposit. Simply use GOLD5000 as a promo code and you're good to go. Capex.com proudly welcomes you to the next level trading experience. Register now and start taking full advantage of the new gold rush. Terms and conditions apply. Exposure to gold obtained via contracts for difference, which are leveraged products and incur a high level of risk. Capex.com is operated by JME Financial Services, Pty Ltd, an authorized financial services provider.
The champ is here! 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 The champ is here!
Good afternoon and welcome to Bull Market Stock Show. This is your host Rian Hobson, and we're doing actually the global debt story of the world today, as the Chinese actually state-owned companies in China are starting to default on their debt and can't repay their lenders, which is actually a big problem. But funny enough, the market didn't react to it. The news was actually sent this morning out of China, that the companies, in South Africa we know it as state-owned companies, but in China is government-controlled companies. Look, in China everything is basically government control, but the companies that is directly under the government started to default on their debt as they can't actually pay their lenders back. Now, I was actually looking further on and looking at the global debt actually, and funny enough, in 2007 I was writing a book which was known as The Ultimate Depression, talking about the global debt scenario, and which is actually somewhere the world will start to default. And at that time it was sitting just under 200 trillion. That was now in 2017. Last year, a global debt was sitting at 253 trillion. Now, 200 trillion in 2017, 253 in 2019. That was now last year, September. This year, the global debt is sitting at 272 trillion US dollars. Now, that is quite a significant jump. Now, obviously, that has all to do with the lockdown regulations. Government needs to borrow money and try to actually stimulate or doing government projects and all of those things. Now, there's no excuse to all of this borrowing that's actually going on. Now, a lot of us just think that global debt is something to do with the government. Now, this is all the debt combined. That is now personal debt, individuals, you and I, everybody. And then there's private debt included, and then also government debt. So all the debt combined in the world is sitting at 272 trillion. Now, the big thing is, like, who the hell borrows so much money? I didn't benefit from this money and all of those things. I'm sure that is the questions that is in your head. Now, when it comes to a government debt, which is actually now carrying the largest portion of that. If I look back at the United States, for example, when Barack Obama took office, it was sitting at 8 trillion, the debt. When he left office, it was at 16 trillion. So he actually ranked up 100% debt in his time of office. Now, everybody says, yeah, but he needed to fight the recession. That is not how you actually fight a recession. You don't borrow on a bad economy. That is, for example, if you're an individual, your company is doing bad, you have a small company and your company is doing bad, then you can't borrow. The bank will tell you straight away, although you want to borrow money, maybe to pay salaries and keep the company afloat for better days, but definitely the bank will tell you, listen here, you can't borrow money. As simple as that. All your business will collapse. Someone else will start the business much better, or what normally happens, the same entrepreneur start the business in a much better and more efficient way after it collapsed. Now, in 2008, the recession in the United States, Barack came out, guns blazing, borrow money, and it actually ranked up debt to about 16 trillion. Today, the debt is sitting at 20 trillion in the United States, where Trump also digged into a borrowing of money, especially now with this whole COVID story. Now, what is this to do with us? But that is normally the question that I get. It's just not government and corporates that borrow this money. Now, it includes you and I as well, because one thing that actually stick up, and that's what people don't want to understand. The more we say that once the government is starting spending money, for example, infrastructure products, free healthcare, social grants, free education, all of those things, that money needs to come from somewhere. It's or the economy is doing well and and the government's collecting taxes, so then he can maybe provide housing and those type of things. But just to take in South Africa, in this example, South Africa's economy is literally being in the recession since 2014. Actually, maybe before that, maybe 2013. Now, since that time, the economy is going downhill every single year. It's just going down. You can go check at the charts. It's just going down the whole time. Now, on a bad economy, and then you still need to provide free housing, social grants that is now paying for children, paying for the elderly people, and other social programs, the free education and those type of things. So you need to pay for these things. So obviously the government is not collecting taxes because the economy is not growing. So in this instance, he went in and go borrow this money for his social programs, the infrastructure and all of those things. Now, we all know that South Africa had some serious stimulus packages just last year. For example, September, the Cyril Ramaphosa borrowed a 400 billion stimulus package, which the money is still gone. Nobody's even talking about it. And then this year, it was again the same story of about 500 billion debt that needs to go in. Where does this money come from? Obviously, it comes from borrowing. So the thing is, you and I are just as responsible for this global debt, and the governments. Now, governments it's very easy to persuade people because they just want to chow the money the whole time. Because what happens now, our government in South Africa can't pay his, basically not defaulting as in yet, but can't pay for these projects, pensions, and all of those things. He can't. And now he promised people the moon and the stars, and obviously his people is also corrupt in the government, the ministers that are corrupt. So the corrupt politicians is also eating on this borrow money. And then on top of that, you also get money for social grants or housing project or whatever the case may be. So at the end, all of us will have to pay for this debt. Now, there's two ways how the government can get this debt and try to repay this debt, which South Africa has already been testing on. That is, increase the tax, increase the sales tax, which is VAT, gain other ways of getting taxes to try and plug the hole close. Now, there's consequence to this, because if you tax people too much, especially when you tax companies too much, then what happens? The companies are actually defaulting on their debt, the company's debt. The company's closing down, people are losing their jobs, and then government can't actually collect taxes anymore. So then they just need to borrow more. That is the current situation that South Africa is in now. So we just need to borrow more. Now, the World Bank already kicked us out of this whole thing. They're saying, hold, they are no longer going to borrow money to South Africa. So the World Bank already said no. They had their terms and conditions, and our finance minister didn't actually allow that to happen, which is totally, look, I would say it's good for the World Bank to actually put up their terms because they know the corruption that is going on in South Africa. Now, this phenomenon is just not in South Africa. South Africa is an emerging economy, which are normally very vulnerable when it comes to debt. Now, there's other parts of the world that already experienced before a collapse in heavy debt, where they can't pay their debt, where they default. Now, China this morning was a scary factor, and it's funny the market didn't react to it. Now, in history, we just have to go back in history and go look what happens if a country or a company is borrowing too much. What is the consequences of that? And when you know the consequence of that, and then you need to find out why did it happen, then it's very straightforward. It's just like in South Africa. We are in exactly the same situation where the Latin American companies were in the 1970s. The same story happened in Asia in the 1990s. And then 2000s, where the global crisis came in, the recession, which started in the United States. The story is exactly the same. In America's situation, it was slightly different because they have printing machines. So they printed money, borrow more money. That's why Barack Obama, when he finished his office, he was sitting from 8 trillion to 16 trillion of debt. Now, somewhere you need to pull in the strings. You need to grow the economy faster so that you can get out of that debt. That is why Trump came in and jump-started the economy, because he needed to get this debt under control. Now, for other countries, I would definitely say the United States is not, I would say, immune to default on debt. And I think a lot of other countries will default in their debt. But this time around, it will not just be governments or people or private sector. it will be all of us. And I will explain this in much more detail after the break.
The champ is here! 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 The champ.
So today is the day when things fall into place, when all my hard work pays off and paves the way. So many times I've fallen down in the past, leaving scars and memories that formed a rash, or one that I scratch when I'm down but not anymore. The rash is healed and I'm ready to walk through the doors. I've always known this day would come, now I'm ready to take it. Not mistaken, this is why I breathe to say I made it. What does that mean? It means I'm finally famous, but not in the context that the world gave us. This is deeper than that, an everlasting love, one from a father who was smiling above, no longer burdened by the past, brand new. He made me this creation as I stand true to the beliefs that I've held and the people I've met while I walk down this path full of rocks and cement. But I've always known that he's had my back, held me in high regard as I write this rap. So I say to others who feel so lost and alone, I've been there in darkness, I've been on that road. I felt what it means to be truly alone, and I felt depression seep deep into my bones. What kept me grounded was what I've always known. God doesn't abandon his children when they are low. I was down dark in my thoughts, on no hope, no reason to start, until one day I told myself this is enough. I'm tired of living like I'm broken, messed up. I realized what was happening and decided to change. This is important because when that decision came, everything related to pain faded away, and it was replaced with an everlasting grace from a God up above who wants us to succeed, past the enemy's deceit, past the bad memories. Yes, I was in darkness, but now I'm in light. Yeah, I have my dark days, that's a matter of fact, but with God in my corner, I know I will be back to who I'm meant to be, how he created me, how he showed me who I was when I couldn't even see. So I write to those who are down on their luck. It's okay to feel this way, to feel like you're stuck, but just know that there's hope, a way out of this pain, and it starts with you saying that I'm not okay. Then you'll realize how you felt all this time, and you won't want to change, but you'll still pave the way. You'll fight hard every day, making things go your way, and with God on your side, there is no losing faith. So with this truth I say, follow your heart to your beautiful fate. Yeah, your beautiful fate. Follow your dreams to your newfound beliefs. Never give up on your destiny. Instead, pave a way past all the deceit and make a new path full of love and harmony. This is your life, and I challenge you to make it. Try your best past all the fear and the hatred. You'll gain more scars, some bruises too. But as long as you keep fighting, those scars don't define you. You were made for this, so take it head on. Take it headstrong, dead on, never let off of the gas. That is your fuel to the fire you've set off. Let it burn the path to victory and follow it right on. Because no matter what comes your way, you know this is your destiny. You know this is what you're meant to be, something you were meant to see. So keep running towards the sunlight, past the dark nights and staring eyes, past the painful past and the blaring lights. Take this life head on and see all the sights.
Be the kind of trader who sees the big picture. The world is changing around you. Global threats push gold, the safe haven asset, to higher prices each and every day. Now's your chance to start trading gold. Just go to capex.com and register to get up to a $5,000 bonus on your first deposit. Simply use GOLD5000 as a promo code and you're good to go. Capex.com proudly welcomes you to the next level trading experience. Register now and start taking full advantage of the new gold rush. Terms and conditions apply. Exposure to gold obtained via contracts for difference, which are leveraged products and incur a high level of risk. Capex.com is operated by JME Financial Services, Pty Ltd, an authorized financial services provider.
Good afternoon and welcome to Bull Market Stock Show. This is your host, Rian Hobson, and we're doing actually the global debt story. Now, the whole thing is this thing doesn't get any media attention currently. And I was looking at the markets now and trying to see will the market react to the Chinese debt. And the whole thing is that people are so accustomed to where governments intervene in these debts. If the company defaults on their debt and then government just get money somewhere, borrow money, and just give it to these state-owned companies. And at some point, like in South Africa, we have a history of this story where state-owned companies just borrow money and borrow money. They fail and fail and fail, and then the government is just keep on bailing them out every single time. At some point, the debt just accumulate and they can't pay back the debt anymore. Now, China is quite a large country, also have a remarkable output and all of those things. But at some point, the debt needs to get repaid. And the state-owned companies already shows that there is some serious problems in China. And not just in China. We're looking at other developed countries, for example, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, especially Australia, with mountains of debt, even Canada. But look, after this whole lockdown, a lot of governments went into some serious borrowing with some low interest rates, low inflation, and then they just pile up the debt. Now, these governments don't pay the debt back. That is the whole problem. When the economy is doing well, they don't pay the debt back. They keep on borrowing. And that's why we're sitting in the situation today where the debt is sitting now at $2 trillion, the global debt. Now, if you just have to go in history to look what happened, what was the response after the default on debt. Now, for example, as I made the first story, was in 1970 with the Latino debt, as they said, or the Latin American debt defaults. Now, in 1970, I would say basically the Latin American economies started to rise. That is now Ecuador, Brazil, Venezuela. All of those countries were actually doing exceptionally well. Now, they borrowed quite a lot of money from the U.S. banks. So the U.S. banks were pouring money into there. That's the time before the era of socialism, where it was still open markets. Argentina is one of them and still struggling until this day. Now, the governments in this situation open up the economies was open. So the people, the governments especially, were borrowing money and build infrastructure projects. And the trade was actually doing well, or I would say the economies in Latin America was doing well. And it was just continuing, and the borrowing is just creeping up the whole time. Now, the problem was they didn't control the debt. And what happened was in the 1980s, I would say late 1970s, 1980s, where oil prices started to rise rapidly. That was now the whole OPEC story and all of those things. Now, everybody would say, yeah, it's because of the sanctions of OPEC, where oil prices go up. That was the whole thing why the Latin American economies actually went into default and can't repay their debt back. Now, any economy is supposed to absorb shocks. Shocks happen every single time and unexpectedly. For example, this whole COVID story. The whole COVID story came as a surprise to a lot of countries. And what happened? They just went to borrowing. Now, a lot of these emerging markets, especially the Latin Americans and African economies, are under enormous amount of debt. And a lot of this debt is accumulated by foreign investors where they pour money down to these economies. Now, in the 1980s, the Latin Americans the Latin American governments couldn't repay the debt back because of the high oil prices. The high oil prices caused actually a global recession. And what happened? Inflation pushed up, and then interest rates went up, and that is where these countries started to default. For example, Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, and all of them. And that also, in the 90s, that actually brought the rise also of Hugo Chavez, which the Venezuela dictator, and also socialism came into effect. in the 1980s in Latin America. Now, it was an absolute disaster because the governments couldn't repay the debt back. So then they became smart, actually. They think they were smart, or they literally drop the currency or devalue their currency, the Latin Americans, so that their companies could benefit from this. So they devalued the currency so that their exports became much cheaper and cheaper against the US dollar. Now, that didn't work so well, because when you devalue your currency, it means that you will create a more inflation. So with more inflation, high inflation normally comes from a devalue of currency. So when they devalue the currency, inflation crept up, interest rates creep up, and then the people and companies couldn't actually hold out, and that is where Argentina, Mexico, and all of those countries actually defaulted. And what happened after that? That was the rise of Hugo Chavez and socialism around Latin America. And until this day, the Latin Americans, especially Argentina, is blaming capitalism for this whole entire mess. What was the mess? The mess was corrupt governments. It was a half-baked capitalism story, because the government were the ones who's doing all these infrastructure projects. And what happens with those infrastructure projects? People were stealing the money. And when they steal the money and basically nothing to show at the end, that is where they started to default on their debt. And that created the first wave that happened in the 1970s. That was in Latin America. The second wave was actually in Asia, which was in 1990. Now, in 1990, countries like Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, all of those countries, Philippines is one, and also Malaysia. The same story happened there. The economies were doing well, that I must say. So the debt was not a problem, because the economy was doing well. But when they found out that, hey, something is wrong here, most of these debt were actually accumulated by the companies, because the companies borrowed money, started businesses. The labor markets was actually very good. It was cheap labor overall, and they actually produced quite a large output. And what happened? Other parts of the world, especially Japan was the growing or the booming sector in Asia. So a lot of these countries were actually dependent on Japan. And what happened? Japan slowed down and actually ended into a recession. So that means these companies in South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, they actually didn't export much goods to actually to Japan and also to other parts of the world. And the companies started to default on their debt. And that led to the 1990 crisis that actually happened in Asia. And that crisis actually lasted until the early 2000s, or I would say until 2001. The Latino debt crisis actually lasted from 1970 until 1989, and that's where the time where the whole entire Asia economy actually, or I would say the Latino economies or Latin American economies actually moved to a more socialist stance, which actually backfired even more, as we can see now with Venezuela. Now, in Asia, at least, South Korea recovered, Indonesia recovered. There was prosperity of recovery. The other problem with Latin America, they started to print money or borrowed more money, where the Asian economies actually consolidated. They accepted that the companies actually accepted that things were bad, and they actually consolidated and rebuilt the economies. Other countries were not so lucky in this part. That was now the Thailand. But Malaysia, Philippines are actually doing exceptionally well, I would say much better with this whole story, as they actually consolidated the debt, and the debt was not broad-based, I would say. It was more from the private sector and not private sector and government. So that actually made the difference there. I will just take a short break, and then I'll be coming back with the 2009 recession and the debt where we are now today in the world.
The champ is here! The champ is here!
Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Ted Turner. Success leaves clues, kids. I just named 5 of the greatest names in business in the last 150 years. And they all have one thing in common. They're ball busters. They're hard as nails. Where does that leave you? I still work 50, 60 hours a week. And I haven't had to work in 35 years. You're not willing to do anything. You're not willing to sacrifice anything to be a high-performance person.
I don't want to be like Dad.
No, most people don't.
I want to be liked.
Yeah, well, see, you want to fit in. I'm the only speaker that you're ever going to hear that really, with all his heart, doesn't give a shit. If I leave here you liking me, I did something wrong.
Getting your business funded is a lengthy process with the banks, and it can take weeks before getting an answer. ProfitFX works with the best in the finance industry to bring you an unrivaled business funding solution for South African businesses. Our funding partners have funded millions in the last year in support of growing your business and our economy. Get in touch with your talk show host to request more information. A trade history of 3 years or more and an annual turnover of 1 million rand or more is required. Terms and conditions apply.
Be the kind of trader who sees the big picture. The world is changing around you. Global threats push gold, the safe haven asset, to higher prices each and every day. Now's your chance to start trading gold. Just go to capex.com and register to get up to a $5,000 bonus on your first deposit. Simply use GOLD5000 as a promo code and you're good to go. Capex.com proudly welcomes you to the next level trading experience. Register now and start taking full advantage of the new gold rush. Terms and conditions apply. Exposure to gold obtained via contracts for difference, which are leveraged products and incur a high level of risk. Capex.com is operated by JME Financial Services, Pty Ltd, an authorized financial services provider.
The champ is here! 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 The champ is here!
Good afternoon and welcome to Bull Market Stock Show. This is your host Trillion1, and we're still doing the global debt story. I'm just actually surprised why this news is not getting attention. It looks everything is about COVID and not actually the critical problem that we are in the world, and that is actually the 4th wave of global death. Now, as I explained, the first wave was in the 1970s, and then we have the second wave, or the first wave was in the 1970s, and that was the Latin American debt story where they default on their debt, and there's actually still misery until this day, especially if you look at Argentina and Venezuela and other countries in Latin America. Now, not a lot of them actually recovered. Even Cuba is the other problem as well. So you could see the side effects of these stories where the debt is actually defaulting, and people move towards more of a socialist stance, and that is actually a worrying factor. In the 1990s was exactly the same in Asia, where the companies were defaulting and people were blaming the private sector because obviously the private sector needed to close their doors, and people were losing jobs and they were running to the government for answers. Now, luckily, countries like Indonesia and South Korea and the Philippines, but other countries were not so lucky. For example, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, yeah, it's getting a bit better, but the thing is what normally happens is that governments normally take charge of these things, or I would say the people actually stand up, and then they were looking towards government to give them leadership. Now, and which is actually a very wrong story if you can just look at Latin America. Now, the story of 2009's recession, we all have an idea of what happened there. In 2008, it was more of a private sector story where the banks in the United States were borrowing money, they deregulated the economy, and they went haywire, borrowed for everybody money. The debt actually moved so far and stretched to other parts of the world, which was now Europe, even in South Africa, Asia. It went all over where people could buy debt in the United States. And a lot of these banks were in severe trouble at the end. And that is where it happened in the 2009 recession. But did these governments and private sectors, did they actually learn from history? The answer is absolutely no. It's absolutely no. Because what happened in 2008, they just went on a rampage again. Governments borrowed more money. The central banks became more involved, where they printed more money. Now, this one here that we are facing is far worse than the one in the 1970s, the one in the 1990s in Asia, and the 2000s until 2009, which was the recession. This time around is something far more severe. And that's why I wrote a book in 2017 and called this The Ultimate Depression. Now, what is this ultimate depression? This one is larger, faster, and actually more broad-based. Everybody is basically connected. For example, if you look at the Latin American story, it was only Latin America that had that problem. Asia was just Asia in the 1990s. And 2002, it was more American story, and that is where other countries recovered quickly, and even in the, not so much, I would say, the United States, because they had a very slow growth. But you could see it's sketched. It's not global. Now, this one that we face today is global. This will be a global depression. And this is now the fourth wave of death, which sits now at currently at 277 trillion US dollars. Now, let me explain and go more into detail with this. The world is very intertwined, I would say, with each other. Europe to Asia, Asia to America, Africa to Asia, Africa to Europe is very, very connected. For example, for me, is it very easy for me to do my podcasting, and you that sits in Asia or in Europe and all of those things can listen to my podcasting. Also, I can borrow money from someone that sits in Europe, for example. He can fund my project here. It's very interlinked. The same how we as individuals can borrow money to one another, that's exactly how governments is doing it as well. So most of the time, governments were borrowing domestically, but nowadays, they can borrow from anybody, from Australia to Canada to wherever. Everybody can invest. And one thing for sure is the rise of the emerging markets, where a lot of foreign companies were borrowing money to Australia, not much to South Africa. South Africa are more domestic debt. But for example, in Canada, a lot of foreigners can borrow money to Canada or to Europe or to whoever. So it is very intertwined. We have small patches where where countries started to default on their debt. For example, Greece, Cyprus were the other one. But for example, with Greece, was a lot of foreign debt that were in there, and a lot of European Union countries were involved in this debt, especially if you look at Germany, because Germany borrowed a lot of money to actually Greece. And the thing is, they didn't want Greece to go, because then the Deutsche Bank would be in trouble. So today, it's not just regional, but it's globally. It's globally. And that makes this thing so scary. And it's just for me funny that the people just don't pay attention to the severe circumstances that we are in this fourth wave of global death. Now, the problem is companies are the big problem here. Not just companies, but governments as well. Governments, especially if you look at South Africa, and if you look at the public sector in South Africa, and also the private, and also the citizens itself. Now, one thing that actually happens, a consistency that actually happened in 1970, 1990, 2002, and today also in 2020, is actually the low interest rates. Low interest rates, people borrow money left, right, and center. That is now you and I buying, basically borrow money to purchase a house, a car, or whatever. Governments do it the same nowadays. Governments are borrowing money to push on, I would say, hospitals for this whole COVID story, housing for people, infrastructure projects to get the economy going. The problem with today is that the total output in the world is only sitting at 84 trillion, where the debt is actually double the size, nearly triple the size at 277 trillion. Now, you can't have such low output, annual output, with so high debt. It doesn't add up. If you just put that in perspective, you as an individual, say, for example, you making about 84 trillion and you need to borrow 277 trillion. The banks will say you are broke because the ratio doesn't make sense. In simple context of accountancy, your ratio to debt is actually, or your income to debt is 2 times the size. You are bankrupt. You are a problem. That is the situation that we have in this in the global economy today. That the output rate is only at 84 trillion, where the debt is sitting at 277 trillion. So somewhere defaults will start to happen. Now, one of them is definitely, I can guarantee you, will be South Africa. South Africa still have the luxury where they can still steal from the pension funds, which they currently busy trying to get into people's pension funds. Other countries are not so lucky, but that will be short-lived. They will maybe give us a breathing space for a year, but it will just make the story even worse for South Africa if they take the people's pension money and also default on the people's pension money and default on the banks, and it will just be chaos all over. And then the people, individuals themselves, default on paying the banks back, the banking sector collapse, everything collapse. Now the problem is, where do you store your money then? Do you put your money in cash or government bonds? Because the thing is, your government bonds is also not a safe haven anymore, because the governments borrow too much money. And that is the issue. The governments also borrow too much money. The thing is, most of the time you would buy shares from companies. Now that is also not a good thing, because of the output level in the world is not as good as the debt. So where the hell do you put your money? That is the big question that nobody could answer. Where do you put your money? Put your money in securities or actually in government bonds? That is the big question. Or do you put your money into the private sector, which is also a problem? Or do you keep money under the mattress? That is the other big question. Will the money actually have some value? Because as these guys are going on, they're just printing and printing and printing money. So will that thing help where you put money under your mattress? Because if the governments can collapse, well, it's not if. They will collapse because they're borrowing too much and people's demands are too heavy. So the governments will collapse, private sector will collapse, individuals will also collapse, and then they're going to print more money, which they're questioning the South African Reserve Bank now of nationalizing the African Reserve Bank for whatever reason, because the government is broke. Now, where the hell do you put your money? Because cash looks also not so safe anymore, because the governments and the central banks are basically just printing money. And when will this thing stop? I definitely don't know, because these governments are not paying their debt back. That is the big thing. So the debt will just keep on swelling and swelling and swelling. The thing is, what we can expect is a sharp rise in inflation in countries like South Africa, I would say the emerging market. That is definitely what we're going to see, a surge in inflation. That's why our Reserve Bank manager or I would say governor yesterday, was so cautious by not lifting up the interest rates. Because at some point, he will actually lift up the interest rates because inflation will actually increase at some point due to all the borrowing that is actually going on. There's a lot of people who are borrowing money from the banks now because of interest rates that are low. I wonder, will they afford those houses when interest rates started to rise? And interest rates will rise, I can tell you that. And then we will sit with a big problem of not governments defaulting, but governments plus companies, including the people, will start to default. So the big question is, where do you put your money? I will not be surprised if the safest thing on earth will be bitcoins and gold. I personally think that. Because at some point, maybe the dollar will last. That is now, I always have my money in dollars just because of Donald Trump. Because at least he knows how to kickstart the economy. But with Sleepy Joe, I'm not so sure regarding that one. So that's why you have the rise of Bitcoin now currently experiencing, and also gold prices that looks also very attractive, because global growth, or I would say global death, is totally out of control. That is it from my side today. Please have a lovely weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday at the same time, 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.
The champ is here! The champ is here!